Hey, what is up, everybody? Welcome to the Guilty as Charged podcast. My name is Steven, and I am the host, as always. And joining me is my guy, Tyler. Tyler, what's up, man? How you doing today?
Great, man. It's a new week, or at least we're halfway through the week, but a new week of news for the Chargers, and things are getting exciting. And we'll talk about all those things in a bit. Steven, how are you?
I'm doing great, man. I've legitimately never seen a week of coaching news quite like this one in my life. Pete Carroll is out, Bill Belichick is out, Nick Saban retires. It's been a week. Obviously, Nick Saban's retirement doesn't really have anything to do with like the NFL, but I cannot say I've seen anything like this. You know, there's talk now that maybe two more playoff teams might be moving on from coaches. Like this coaching cycle is crazy. It's legitimately one of the craziest and most exciting coaching cycles I can ever remember.
It's wild, and there's been a change of the guard, and eras changing with like the quarterbacks. So Rivers, Breeze, Manning, other Manning, Brady, etc. That was a big change. But coaching, some of these long-standing guys have stood for a very long time. I am very curious how much things change. I do think Saban potentially opens up something. Some people have like said Vrabel there, but I don't really buy that, to be honest. But I am curious how many teams that have said, hey, we're keeping our coach for 2024 or are in the postseason, like you said, are now going, well, okay, yeah, maybe we got to think about this for a second.
Yeah. Yeah, and it still sounds like Bill Belichick and Pete Carroll want to keep coaching. Although Pete Carroll is supposedly going to be like working in the front office in Seattle. So I don't know, man. Either way, it's going to be crazy. And we're going to talk about some of that today. In case you missed it, we did interview Jeff Diamond on the Chargers channel yesterday. He is a former NFL Executive of the Year as the GM of the Minnesota Vikings and president of the Tennessee Titans. Had a great conversation with him about some insight into kind of what goes on in these interviews. And hopefully you guys will check that out and enjoyed it. Today, we are going to talk more about Mr. Mike Vrabel. A lot of people potentially penciling him in for New England, but it sounds like they might be all in on Gerard Mayo, which they wouldn't even have to do an interview search. They could just promote him, apparently. So we got to talk about Mike Vrabel and like what kind of a staff would look like. The Chargers, of course, have kind of really started their GM search in earnest. And so we'll talk about those two things. Before we get started about those two topics, the Chargers did interview Mr. Patrick Graham, the Raiders defensive coordinator. I think he's a candidate we didn't necessarily talk about. Obviously, Tyler, your dad is a Raiders fan. You've watched a lot more of Raiders football than probably the majority of our listeners. So what do you think of Mr. Patrick Graham's candidacy and the Chargers interviewing him?
Okay, so as far as candidacy, I don't believe he'd be super high up there. I think you have to have, Mike McDonald's defense, for example, and the Ravens defense, and things like that. But I will say, a lot of Chargers fans saw the name, and there was this said and that said. I have to respect Graham and what he's been able to do with Max Crosby and basically not really anybody else,
Right.
and make a lot of pieces that aren't great pieces work. A lot of, cast off veteran guys, just being able to gel those guys together, most of them on the cheap, and create a pretty decent unit. One that we saw limit the Miami Dolphins and one where they beat the Denver Broncos and they beat the Chargers and they beat the Chiefs. Like, got to respect what Graham has been able to do with what they have versus maybe what we've seen with the Chargers and what they did with a lot more.
I think, probably like the bar of trying to evaluate coaches is who is doing more with less. And that doesn't mean, you are automatically, accomplishing an elite defense. The Raiders were not that for the season as a whole, although the last 8 weeks of the season, they were second in the league in EPA per play and ninth in success rate. So they were really good on defense this year. And like Tyler is alluding, it's not like they have, a super stacked roster. Malcolm Kuntz is their edge rusher too. They don't really have, high-end linebackers. They certainly don't have high-end cornerback play. There are significantly worse units out there from a talent perspective. So, it's been kind of a mixed bag for him. His last season in New York, he certainly had an above average defense there as well. I think they were 12th in EPA per play that season, kind of middle of the pack. But he's pretty well respected as a leader. He's pretty well respected as a player's coach. You hear Max Crosby and all those guys talk about him. They speak very highly of him. So I think it makes sense to interview him. Again, the Chargers are casting a very wide net here, and I think that is the right approach, in my opinion. And so why not, hey, man, the Raiders looked like an elite defense when they played us a few weeks ago. Like, let's see what happened there. Let's see how did you tie down Mahomes a few weeks ago? And so, again, I think pick his brain, see what happens there, and see if this is a guy that you could potentially invest in. I don't like one of the top candidates by any means, but, there's no harm in asking.
I also be a little bit curious if they would consider, let's say Harbaugh goes to the Raiders. Does he keep Patrick Graham, or does another coach keep Patrick? I don't know if it's Belichick, let's say. I doubt it, but do they keep Patrick Graham? If not, if Patrick Graham becomes available, you already had a meeting with him.
Yeah, and that's, you can do a lot worse than Patrick Graham as a defensive coordinator. So this is, again, you do interviews for a lot of reasons: gather intel on opponents, gather intel on division rivals. Obviously, the actual interview, maybe this is a guy we could envision being a coordinator at some point. Build connections. So you do a lot of everything. He is the first external head coaching interview, for what it's worth, and we'll see what goes there. The other, you mentioned him earlier, the other news in terms of the head coaching search, the Chargers have finally requested an interview, or at least it was finally made public, with Ravens defensive coordinator Mike Macdonald, a guy that Tyler and I are both relatively high on, but prefer offensive candidates if given the choice. So it is going to be interesting to see. The Chargers will interview both Ravens coordinators. Since they are currently on a bye, the Chargers cannot interview them until after the divisional round. So that is certainly something that they'll have to wait for on those two candidates.
Yeah, if we didn't just do this with Staley, I think he'd be higher for us on our list.
Yeah,
but because we did, therefore he's not. But great candidate. If you're looking for candidates around the NFL and ranking him based on overall, not just Chargers specific, you could argue he's, I guess with Vrabel now it changes things, but fourth, certainly a top 5 candidate, I think. So really good candidate. Both candidates, I think, are pretty strong from the Ravens. They can bring a lot with them. The Ravens can bring, or McDonald can bring the defensive coaching staff, and they can bring Hortiz. And so there's a lot you can bring with these guys. And that's what I do hope a lot of fans understand with some rankings or discussions of coaches. It's not just the coach. Sometimes it's not even just the GM. It's who they can bring with them. And that's why some people, I know like Isabel's in the chat, likes like the Bobby Slowick, Adam Peters connection, that sort of thing. It's not, the Chargers just don't need a coach. They need a lot and a whole culture change and alignment and stuff like that. So I think guys like McDonald, are really appealing and attractive because of what they could bring with them.
Yeah, Mike Macdonald has been up through the Baltimore tree. That's where obviously his roots are. The Ravens are obviously the top team in the AFC right now. They've been one of the best organizations in the league over the last decade. He was also with Jim Harbaugh as the defensive coordinator. So it is going to be really interesting to see from not just a coaching search, but Jim Harbaugh's defensive coordinator at Michigan, Jesse Minter, and Mike Macdonald are kind of these two, like, arguably the brightest minds in defense in terms of the young guys coming up right now. And this could potentially be, like the defensive meta. It was obviously the Vic Fangio stuff for a little bit. Before that, it was the Cover 3 Legion of Boom stuff. Now, potentially, we could be seeing, the Mike Macdonald, John Harbaugh, Jim Harbaugh defenses kind of, permeate throughout the rest of the league in terms of defensive schemes.
Yeah, absolutely. And then so don't go get the next big thing, because that sometimes doesn't work.
Yeah. We'll see. But, at the end of the day, I think also one of the things that's in vogue right now is hiring a coach who's not a play caller. And, we've seen Brian Dable and Jonathan Gannon and Nick Sirianni. So it is going to be interesting to see if that applies here to the Chargers, if they hire one of these leader guys and that person ends up hiring play callers himself.
Yeah, especially as it pertains to these defensive guys.
Yeah. All right. Let's start with Mike Vrabel here again. Shocker from Tennessee that he's available. I think, he is objectively a really great candidate for this job. To me, one of the 10 best coaches in the league in terms of resetting a culture, in terms of building a high-end defense, all that stuff, game management, are areas that he really excels at. So Let's dive into this big four that we have prepared. We did this exercise previously for other coaching candidates and GM candidates. So if you missed that, please go check that out here. But Tyler, you did you found a lot of nuggets here because Mike Vrabel has a very Houston Texan, New England Patriot, Tennessee Titan background, but his influence kind of goes in other places as well here. So why don't you walk us through some of your preferred options here?
Yeah, so Brian Gain as the assistant GM for the Bills right now. The Chargers, we'll talk about the other candidate in a second. They already interviewed they're going to interview one member of the Bills front office. Brian Gain, they were together, of course. This big four, for those who haven't seen it, it's built off of connections. Of course, we could just select the best guys possible and throw them in here, and maybe that ends up happening. But I don't see any connection from Vrabel to Adam Peters. We're trying to find relationships, history, that sort of thing. And if you want to hear how we feel about other GMs and other coaches, watch our other videos. So Gain would be the GM here, I think. There was 1 year with him and Brant Tillis for the Kansas City Chiefs, who's a big name right now as well. But Vrabel was a player. Tillis was there for 1 year. I think it was his first year. And then that's kind of their history. So it's there, but I don't think it's as strong a connection as with Brian Gain here. I do have Arthur Smith on here. There are definitely some other options. We'll see what they do with Tennessee. So Tim Kelly, Charles London right now. Tim Kelly is their offensive coordinator in Tennessee. Charles London is the pass game coordinator and quarterbacks coach. So it could be one of those two guys. But as Steven pointed out when we were discussing earlier, it could just be that they want to keep everything intact for Will Levis as things move forward. So that's possible. George Godsey, the tight end coach for the Ravens, is a possibility there, offensive coordinator. Arthur Smith, I could have put like an asterisk or maybe just left him in like the alternate OCs option, but him and Vrabel spent so much time together when Arthur Smith was the tight ends coach. Then he was promoted to the offensive coordinator. And during that time, they went to the AFC Championship. They were second in success rate behind the Chiefs over that 2-year span by like 0.3%. That's how good they were. They had Marcus Mariota. They pivoted to Ryan Tannehill in that first year with Arthur Smith. He ended up winning comeback player of the year. The next year, Derrick Henry rushed for 2,057 yards or whatever it was, which is ridiculous. And I don't like the Chargers don't need that, but that sounds great that you can pivot to that. So I think like Tim Kelly, Charles London, these other guys, Arthur Smith is really the best available candidate with the connection, of course. Whether you feel great about him after the sort of blow up thing, after the Saints game is a whole other thing, or how we use Bijan or Kyle Pitts. I get that. But to me, Arthur Smith is a proven play caller and a veteran head coach as is. As far as go for it.
No, I was going to say just regarding Arthur Smith, I understand why people would be hesitant. We're not advocating for him as a head coach. Like this is offensive coordinator. I think some guys are just not meant to be head coaches, and that kind of pressure of everything can really get to them. The Falcons were top 10 in EPA per play and DVOA on offense last season with Marcus Mariota at quarterback. And then this season, for whatever reason, the rails kind of came off with the Desmond Ridder situation and then Taylor Heineke and then back to Desmond Ridder. When Arthur Smith has a quarterback he trusts that is in play for the long haul, he's coordinated very high-end offenses. So I understand it did not go well this past season in Atlanta. He wouldn't have a quarterback issue with the Chargers. He would have Justin Herbert, who has, some skill set overlap with what Ryan Tannehill got. Ryan Tannehill is a play action shot king. He's so good at that. Justin Herbert is good at that. Obviously, you can use Justin Herbert's legs. So there is some overlap there. I think the fit would be really clean. Arthur Smith was a guy that I was very interested in the Chargers hiring as a head coach a few years ago. And so I understand the hesitation, of mentioning him. I mentioned him as a potential guy that could work with Jim Harbaugh, and people were not happy about that. So I get it. I understand the trepidation here, but you're talking about an offensive coordinator, not a head coach. And like I said, there's a proven track record with Arthur Smith. When he has a stable quarterback situation, he coordinates high-end offenses. And I think him and Vrabel are extremely close. They're like best friends. I think wherever Vrabel is going, I'm pretty sure Arthur Smith is going to be the offensive coordinator.
Yeah, I would agree. And it would be the smart choice. And just looking, we kind of joked and Kevin even joked, if they have Arthur Smith and finally we can develop our RB3 and wide receiver 4 and Quentin Johnston. I joked the same thing. Looking at the history of those 2 years, it was very much AJ Brown, 2,000 yards or whatever it was
Yes,
over those 2
Derrick Henry.
seasons. So it's not like, they forgot about AJ Brown. They
Right.
didn't have, 1,500, like the AJ Brown best seasons like he did in Philly, but it's not like Tannehill was throwing it a ton. And like I said, they had Mariota first, then pivoted to Tannehill. So run game will get going. Obviously, the tight ends will be solid. I think that you have Keenan, Quinton, whatever it is. I think Arthur Smith is a great candidate. And frankly, I'm not saying this is the deciding factor here, but because we'll see what Harbaugh can pull. But if you're just looking at the history of John Harbaugh with offensive coordinators out there isn't one out there connected to him like Arthur Smith.
Yeah.
It's like Greg Roman probably, and like there's an aspect of Greg Roman that will work. I don't really think it works for Justin Herbert or some other or many other quarterbacks out there. Vrabel saying, "Hey, I'm going to bring in Arthur Smith." I think that would be pretty enticing. And Vrabel, for what it's worth, would probably also work with like an Adam Peters. So every time you get Vrabel, Peters, Arthur Smith, or Cunningham, Vrabel, Smith, that's awesome. And then the defensive side was just pick whatever awesome defensive coordinator you want. Like he can pull from anybody. I put Anthony Weaver here, the defensive line coach and associate head coach for the Ravens. You could pull him, although he did get a head coaching interview. I don't know if that's going to materialize. But hey, like that's how regarded he is. We talked about Terrell Williams, the associate head coach for the Titans, who probably would be the favorite for defensive coordinator, given Vrabel let him be the head coach for a game against the Bears in the preseason, and he is the associate head coach. Again, it depends though if he stays with Tennessee, leaves, whatever. Shane Bowen, who's the current defensive coordinator for the Titans, John Butler, who is currently the pass game coordinator and DBs coach for the Bills. Like, there's a lot of Vrabel can pull from. And to me, like, Gain is, in terms of GM, like connection, I don't know if that's like my favorite GM candidate out there, but still, like, Vrabel can pull a heck of a coaching staff. And I think that is worth discussing for sure.
And I think for what it's worth, Vrabel is probably going to have a decent amount of roster say. I think the issue with the Titans, it seemed very much like the owner wanted things to be like new age and everything like that. And I don't know if that's like a great fit, obviously. But if you hired a younger GM candidate, we're going to talk about some of these guys later on, and you have Mike Vrabel, you can have kind of an understanding of power structure that theoretically could make sense. I don't believe that a head coach as a GM as a model works in today's NFL. I think you do need a clear power structure. So you do need a GM who has some say and has some pull and can, I think, also be able to override the head coach when needed. So it's kind of up in the air. I don't think you necessarily have to pull from a connection to Mike Vrabel, although obviously it is kind of preferred model that these two guys kind of know each other. But at the same time, you look at like what's working in Detroit with Dan Campbell and Brad Holmes. You could certainly kind of follow that model as kind of like an established assistant GM, established head coaching candidate, and see what you get with the Chargers.
Yeah, in this particular case too, if Harbaugh, goes back to Michigan, let's say, anyway, if Harbaugh goes back to Michigan, stays or goes elsewhere, whatever, you do want to go after Vrabel immediately. Yeah. And so I think like someone like Brian Gain can kind of sit on the back burner and not be the, you don't have to hire Gain first. You don't have to hire GM first in this case. You go and get Vrabel. Oh, yeah. Wow. Rusty's saying Vrabel's his first choice. I respect it. I get it.
From earlier Guns N' Roses fan 2012, honorable mention for alternate OC Mike LaFleur. I think that's something that Vrabel could pull from as well. It's a great choice because Mike Vrabel hired Matt LaFleur as his first offensive coordinator in Tennessee. So I think this is kind of a leg up for Vrabel over the other top guys, is we know that Vrabel can put together a truly like high quality coaching staff. He's done that for years in Tennessee. He's hired 2 offensive coordinators who became head coaches. He's hired a bunch of high quality defensive coaches. So that to me is a leg up over Jim Harbaugh. Even for me, if you're kind of stacking up the chips, I think Vrabel could put together the best staff because I think he really is like somebody who could just, nail this coaching search. I think people like the amount of people who voiced their support of Mike Vrabel after he got fired was pretty shocking. So, and I guess not shocking, but it was outpouring. So I think he would put together an awesome staff, starting from offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, position coaches. Like, really think about the kind of transition you would have with the Chargers with Mike Vrabel, Anthony Weaver, and somebody else. You could swap Terrell Williams in there. Like, the amount of physicality, defensive line emphasis would be drastically different over what we've seen for the past few years. So if Mike Vrabel is your number one candidate, I totally understand. I think he is a great coach. I think he can put an awesome staff together. And I think you're seeing that on this screen. Like, I think if you're talking about big three, if you take the GM out of it and just give me like head coach, offensive coordinator, defensive coordinator, this might be my favorite trio that we've done in this exercise.
Yeah, what makes Vrabel so enticing, which we talked about on the Chargers channel, is that I don't know if you can, he didn't exactly do it the third time, although the quarterback situation has been different, but he hired LaFleur, and then Arthur Smith was the next guy up. Like, having the succession plan is so key, and be able to actually maybe even improve with Arthur Smith and the Titans and get, again, Henry to offensive player of the year, comeback player of the year for Tannehill with Arthur Smith, and that be your next guy in line option. That's pretty cool. Like, Vrabel completely understood that particular assignment and nailed that. With Arthur Smith, I'm curious, do you feel like, let's see, they have a really good year with the Chargers, year one. Herbert's great. Everyone's healthy. Do you feel Smith is even a 2025 candidate for head coach? Or do you think the NFL probably wants to see a couple of years before bringing him back?
Ooh. That's a tough one, man. I think the Chargers would have to like legitimately like go on a playoff run. I think like Arthur Smith's, PR needs some work right now, especially after the way things ended in Atlanta. And I totally understand the concerns there, but I think it would need some work. Plus, if the Chargers are like this wildly improved team, it would kind of just be more, I feel like the credit would go towards Vrabel in this instance, not towards Arthur Smith.
Yeah. Yeah, man, I really do like this coaching staff. Just the options. You don't have to settle for the one guy, like especially on defense. Do you want the Ravens defensive line? Do you want the Titans defensive line?
Bill's secondary. That's
Bill's
a great
secondary.
group, yeah.
Like, just pick whatever you want. And the defense would be pretty good, I think. Like, at minimum, the defense is really good. Unlike Belichick, of course, like, sure, Vrabel does not have the championships in the history. But like, this staff, if you're telling me Vrabel, Smith, Weaver, or Belichick as the GM, and then McDaniels, Patricia, or whatever, respectfully, championships aside, this staff for Vrabel, if available, is outstanding and much better.
Yeah. Like I said, one of my favorite groups here. And you have options at offensive coordinator, options at defensive coordinator. The Chargers did block a request for Ryan Ficken. So
that's what I'm talking about. That is the best thing that happened all week. That is the best thing that's happened all week.
Shout out Ryan Ficken. What a legend, man. The Chargers finishing third in DVOA this year is just, a major hat tip to him. So that coaching staff would feed families, man. Like, this group plus Ryan Ficken, sign me the hell up. I would be super stoked with this coaching staff.
Yeah, that's a 1, 2, 3 right there. And like, even if like the defensive coordinator, even if you're not sure, like, Vrabel with his background will make it work. So it's a really kick-ass staff. GM, we'll see. Yeah, but we'll see. This is just the connection here.
Yeah, should be a lot of fun. So you guys let us know what you're feeling about Mike Vrabel and his candidacy. But I think objectively, he's a top tier candidate right now. So whether you feel about Jim Harbaugh, Mike Vrabel, or Ben Johnson, I think that's the trio, and I'm stoked with any of the three. But I feel like Mike Vrabel's staff, man, might give him a real edge there. But I still tend to lean offense in Jim Harbaugh.
Yeah, no, totally. I do as well.
All right.
For clowns, though. Woohoo!
Woo! Thank you. Appreciate it. All right, let's get to the GM side of here. The Chargers did interview Mr. Brandon Brown, the assistant GM of the New York Giants. So he is their first external interview, and he is going to be featured in this slideshow as well. So we did this earlier for other GM candidates for our top guys, kind of an elevator pitch here. Brandon Brown, I think, is certainly one of the younger guys in this cycle that the Chargers could pull from. But there's nothing but positive things that come out of New York about Brandon Brown. I had a friend of mine who covers the New York Giants, and he reached out to me and said that Brandon Brown was one of the biggest winners of this year's accelerator program meeting that happened a few weeks ago at the ownership meeting. So he's a guy that's considered a rising star. The Giants consider him their football solutions guy. Brian Dable, Joe Shane kind of have big personalities. They're trying to be aggressive. And Brandon Brown is kind of like let's settle down, let's be patient kind of guy. He has that kind of influence there. The Giants literally do not have a college scouting director because they trust Brandon Brown to basically wear that hat as well. So this is a guy who's fulfilling multiple roles there. He is another candidate who's been tied with the Eagles. That's where he was previously before the New York Giants. So he has a really unique background because of that. And then I know that some people will value this. He has a law degree. He has earned his law degree in environmental law after he played football and graduated from the University of Fordham. So very unique candidate, certainly on the younger side, but there's a ton of positivity about him. He's certainly a guy that is considered a rising star in the GM world right now.
Yeah, I think that he's very young. I think he's 35 years old.
Yeah.
Super, super young. And I'll be honest. The Giants aren't good. So that is basically my instant.
They won a playoff game last year.
That's right. Hey, that's more than the Chargers did, right? That is a positive increase. But I think this is a candidate who is someone who will get there eventually. I think it's a bit early. Again, 35 is very, 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 very young, which is not a problem by any means. But some people have more years in the league. But yeah, you almost like Cunningham, the Giants, the Bears have big decisions with quarterback coming up. Yeah. And I think if you show me, again, this might never happen. The Chargers might have a GM for the next 10 years. But if you had a Brandon Brown and they go out and they successfully get another quarterback, the Giants become actual, playoff contenders and actually competitive in their division year in, year out, then I think that's a time where you're like, okay, this is it. But his resume is really enticing. The former experience with the Eagles, of course, is great. All good things about him for sure. Just a bit young, honestly.
Yeah. But he is the first interview, so had to talk about him. He was not on our initial list, I think, because both of us kind of agree his age is probably a bit of a concern. Mm-hmm. Tom Telesco was also very young. Not to say that they shouldn't hire another young guy because of Tom Telesco.
Yeah.
But I think both of us just kind of prefer a little bit more experience right now.
For sure. All right. A complete opposite would be Jeff Ireland, the assistant GM and vice president of the New Orleans Saints. Most experienced candidate, I think, by far at this point. As you pointed out, key presence in maneuvering the Saints' cap problems. The Saints do it every year in some way. Doesn't mean they're always a great team, living in that sort of situation. But hey, they are also in the postseason, so good for them. The Chargers are not, so there it is. A couple of connections by way of Miami and Dallas. Ben Johnson, when Ben Johnson was in Miami, and of course Dan Quinn. Oh, no, sorry, Dan Quinn would be Seattle, not Dallas. Pardon me. But connections there. Anybody read Jeff Ireland's Wikipedia page recently?
It's like tiny.
No, it's multi-paragraphs about how Dolphins fans would fly banners over the games to say "Fire Jeff Ireland."
Oh, cool.
And a couple of comments. He had asked, only because Des Bryant brought it up, he asked Des Bryant a question about his mother potentially being a prostitute, and that kind of got him in some trouble.
Yikes, I didn't know that.
It's a long Wikipedia page, so go ahead and read it, everybody. Now, anyway. Funny enough, the last time the Dolphins fans flew that banner was when they were playing the Chargers. So, there's the connection there. Anyway, so very seasoned candidate. And I guess we could just read the Wikipedia page for the next 20 minutes. Like, we'll just do that instead.
See, I read his profile on the Saints website. I didn't read his Wikipedia page.
You go to Wikipedia for the real shit, man. If I teach my students anything, it's go to Wikipedia for the
super reliable source, guys.
Oh man. Oh, but then he got hired by the Seahawks, and then he was they moved on from him after a month. So
real ringing endorsement here.
Yeah, so there you go. You come, the 210 of you are in here listening to us right now. We give you the best stuff. Like, only here can you get us to read you Wikipedia.
My face is literally red from laughing. Oh my gosh. In all seriousness, though, the Chargers going from Tom Telesco to a Saints person would be kind of hilarious. Like, just go from somebody who is very much. You put the link in the chat. That's hilarious. Um, Going from somebody who is very much like risk averse in terms of the cap, in terms of trading up,
Mm.
to somebody coming from the Saints who have just restructured every single contract that they possibly could for the last decade and then traded up every single time. Uh, I did find a story on ESPN of his second draft. It would have been the 2017 draft with the Saints, about how he convinced uh, Sean Payton and Mickey Loomis to not trade up, and it allowed them to draft Ryan Ramczyk. And then that was the
Mm.
only story I could find of his tenure in the Saints since that point. So, uh, it is what it is. Very experienced. I don't know how much the experience count. I'm finding myself thinking of the failure is experience quote from Thanos in Infinity War. But certainly it makes sense to pick the brain of a Saints person about looming cap issues.
Yeah,
I'll say that.
absolutely. Steven, that was wonderful. You need to be the PR person for anybody. That was
Positive twist is my thing, I guess.
that was very, very good. Jeff Ireland can take the cap and make it work. You made his resume and made that work. I was almost sold, man. I was almost sold.
Yeah. All right, let's get the next one here.
Not the same thing.
Yeah, not the same thing at all. Terrence Gray is the director of player personnel for the Buffalo Bills. We talked on our previous show about GM candidates, about different backgrounds being a bit of a strength for candidates because you can see different ideas, different strategies, different ways to manipulate the cap, different ways to draft, all that stuff. Terrence Gray certainly has that. He's been around the Chiefs, he's been around the Minnesota Vikings and the Buffalo Bills. When we talked to Tej Seth, he mentioned that one of the things that he would value is a person coming from a background who has built a contender around an expensive quarterback. That's what the Chargers are going to be trying to do with Justin Herbert. And he's been around Josh Allen, who's on a very expensive contract. He's been in different kind of like journeyman contract stages with the Minnesota Vikings. The Bills have been very consistent competitors. The Vikings in their tenure, he probably left before they were like really good. So, it is what it is. But I think his background is one that would lead itself to a diverse approach to this GM position, as well as having that experience and also connected to Ryan Ficken. So Ryan Ficken would stick around.
That's never mind. Number one candidate right here, and hands down, Terrence Gray here. No, I really like the breadth of experience here. I think for a lot of these GMs, the ones that we had looked at before, the most they kind of maxed out was with Adam Peters with 3, and then Ian Cunningham with 3 teams, and that was it. So to see someone like Gray with the Chiefs and the Vikings and the Bills, like that's another candidate that really, really sticks out there in terms of experience. This contract with Justin Herbert is not going to be cheap. It hasn't been cheap with Josh Allen. And it's not that the Bills haven't won the Super Bowl. They haven't exactly been like a top tier competitive, like say the Chiefs have been, but they've been very, very competitive, making the postseason, been one of the best teams every single year, no matter what. So pick that guy's brain. How have you done it? How have you been consistent? How have you, especially from their perspective, taken yourselves from not being the division winner, that being the Patriots for X number of years before that, to becoming that team that has flipped the switch to become, the class of your division? The Chargers are trying to figure out how to do that with the Chiefs and the Broncos, and the Raiders are ahead of them right now. But you know what? For the most part, the Chiefs. How do you get ahead? How did you flip that switch in your organization? So good to ask him. Good to interview him for sure. Good candidate, I think.
Yeah. All right, let's get to. There's another one, right?
Yes, Jeff King. Yep, Jeff King, the co-director of player personnel for the Chicago Bears. That was a fist pump for those who were listening and not seeing it live. So, Steven, would you like to talk about Jeff King? that was very emotional.
I just this is such a different background as a GM candidate. It's super rare that he was never a star player in the NFL, but he played 8 years in the league, and that experience is extremely different. in terms of the typical profile that you're getting from a GM candidate. He was a blocking tight end for the most part. He also played basketball at the University of Virginia Tech. So he did both things. He was kind of a double sport athlete in college, which again is very rare. Despite his profile as a player, he decided to truly like grind it out as a scout and an analytics grunt intern with the Chicago Bears. He rose up in pro personnel in terms of kind of adding free agents. That's kind of what he does for the Chicago Bears right now. He's inside of that realm. But it's just a unique approach because you're getting a former player who was a physical like blocking tight end. He also came up in the league in analytics, and that approach has really helped him rise through the ranks as a personnel standpoint. He's been well respected for his work on day 3 prospects in Chicago, as well as kind of signing low-key free agents. He's been given credit for the draft pick of Braxton Jones, among others, who is a 5th-round pick who's been a quality starting left tackle for them. Guys like Justin Jones, who signed from the Chargers, that's a guy who signed there largely because of Jeff King's work. So there's a lot of kind of the margin things that I think would be really cool here. He also was heavily involved with each Bears coach. He had great relationships with John Fox, Vic Fangio, Matt Nagy, as well as Matt Eberflus right now. So he is somebody who kind of tiptoes in between the personnel side and the coaching side and the player side. Players go to him for advice pretty often. So this is more of a like leadership GM as opposed to like he's somebody who is like he has obviously the scouting stuff with him, but it's very different than like this guy has drafted really well. This guy has signed a lot of key free agents. This guy's into analytics. This guy's into cap. Jeff King kind of does all of that while also having the ability to say, hey, like I played in the league recently. I played for quite a while, and I have that background with him as well. So he is, to me, like one of the more interesting candidates right now. I think there are better candidates, but in terms of just like intrigue, I would love to see what Jeff King would look like. I also got retweeted about this from like Kyle Long. A bunch of Bears players were like fully supportive of Jeff King becoming a potential GM. So he has great relationships in Chicago with the Bears players, with the coaches. Like the tweet kind of blew up a little bit, and it was just like me tweeting how cool the story was. So it just kind of spoke to me a little bit about how valued he is in Chicago.
That's fascinating. I didn't know you got all the love. So first off, congratulations. I love that this is an individual. It's funny that Cunningham, same way as a former player, there's different backgrounds here. This is a very, very different background. And I do love just looking through his resume and seeing how many years he's spent working, climbing up the ladder to get to this point. And maybe he's not a GM this year, but maybe he's assistant GM coming up. Let's say if Cunningham leaves, he's assistant GM and keeps rising through there. That's really cool. And I do love that you mentioned that he is close to the players, is respected by players. Players will go to him. That's very, very important. I don't know that was the same with Telesco. Not that he wasn't friendly, not that he wasn't a good guy.
Yeah.
But Jeff King, it just seems, especially if you're already getting player endorsements on social media from former, well-known players, it seems like he's a guy who really connects with his players in a way that makes you want to stay there, makes you want to work there. And get paid to be there, of course. So that's great. And I think it is worth something for any candidate who has it to know what it is like to be out there. And also for those who want Brock Bowers, he's probably picking Brock Bowers. I'm just saying, like, I think the former tight end is going to pick Brock Bowers for what it's worth.
And I could just see like Jeff King and Mike Vrabel just like being a great fit. I don't know why that like really stood out to me. Two guys who have played in the league, very player friendly culture. I think that would make a lot of sense to me. He is kind of a younger guy in terms of front office experience. So I think Jeff King, again, like I don't think he's necessarily a top guy. If you believe the reports, Adam Peters and Ian Cunningham are only interested in the Washington job. So we'll see what happens there. The Chargers have not officially requested for Ed Dodds. Joe Hortiz doesn't have any requests, at least publicly at this point. So we'll see what happens. But I think Jeff King is a very different candidate who would be more of a leadership GM kind of guy, as opposed to we're drafting this or whatever the case may be. Not to say that he doesn't have that, but the leadership traits I think are definitely there. There is also a funny story regarding Jeff King. I don't know if we want to get into funny stories here a little bit. Callie Bear pointed this out, but when he played for the Carolina Panthers, he was in a game and he shit his pants and kept playing.
I'm sure it was all whites too. Like I'm sure
it
they
was
were
all whites. So the story is that he had to go to the bathroom, but it was close to halftime, and he didn't want to go miss the game. He wanted to wait until halftime. And then he went up for a catch, and Roman Harper, the safety of the Saints, just hit him right in the perfect spot. And so Jeff King shit his pants on the field and kept playing for like the last minute or whatever it was. And according to the teammates at the time who were interviewed, it endeared him to the team as somebody who would play through literal shit to help his team win.
Wow. I mean, that bigger man than I am. I have actually gotten up during the podcast to drop a deuce. I have never done the full deuce drop in the middle of a podcast before, but that's why he's making the big bucks over there as a co-director of player personnel. That's great. That is certainly one way to get untouched to the end zone, is to shit your pants.
Yeah, no kidding.
That's a yak monster for sure.
Yeah, if the Panthers were smart, they would have thrown him the football after that, I don't know if they did or not.
I'm glad this is what he's known for. That'll be the first question they ask him when he gets hired.
I'm sure it was. For what it's worth, he's like proud of the story. He thinks that's like really funny, and I don't know if he uses it like often or not, but there were like 4 stories about it when I Googled him. So it has come up recently.
Yeah, that's king shit right there.
Literally.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you.
Nice.
Thank you. Bye-bye.
Oh, man. This is a funny episode. I'm glad we did this. Oh, man. What a day. Objectively, though, like I said, very interested in him as a candidate. We'll see ultimately what happens there, but I know people will be hesitant about like, oh, the Bears haven't been very good. I think less so than the head coach. Like, you're trying to find the right person, the right leader, and I think this is a very clear leadership side. So I'll be very interested in him as a candidate.
Mm-hmm. Absolutely. And that's it for the new candidates, right?
That is correct.
Yay. We did it.
So the Chargers did interview, just to make it clear, the Chargers have requested to interview everybody that we hired, that we discussed today. We did not discuss them previously, so we wanted to make sure we gave you guys some quick thoughts about them this afternoon.
Yeah, I see the comments in the chat about Vrabel or about these guys. We're kind of weeks ahead. We sort of got ahead during the season, and so we have covered a lot of these guys already. So if you missed it, go back, leave us a like, leave us a comment, whatever. Go check those out. Just in case, before we head out, from Charlie Sinclair. Charlie, good interaction on Twitter. I think Vrabel might be in play for the Raiders. Keep up the good work, boys. Is there a connection there, or is it just like a...
I don't know if there's a direct connection there, but Mark Davis has very much been a big name hunter, as well as kind of obsessed with the Patriots. And so, if the Patriots are really in on Gerard Mayo and nobody else, then I think it makes sense for everybody to interview Mike Vrabel. Like, honestly, like every team should interview Mike Vrabel here. So the Raiders, I think, have kind of been on the fence with Antonio Pierce. This is just my read on the situation. Obviously, you can correct me here, but Tom Brady as well. They have a great relationship with Tom Brady.
Yeah.
Charlie pointed that too. Great shout out there. Reportedly, a better relationship with Brady than with Robert Kraft, for what it's worth. What was I saying?
I don't know. I was going to correct you if you were wrong, but I don't know what to correct you about.
Oh, so my understanding of the Raiders situation right now is they're cool with Antonio Pierce if they cannot get a big name. Like, they're going to do their due diligence on Jim Harbaugh and Mike Vrabel. And if they can land one of those two, I think they will do that. If not, like, they're cool with Antonio Pierce. So I don't think they're as like urgent as the Chargers could be in terms of the big names. But I do think they're definitely interested in hiring one of those two. I think they just also feel like, hey, we have this guy who the players love, the locker room loves, the former Raiders love. So I think they're just not as urgent about it. But I do think, like Charlie said, I think it would make a lot of sense for them to hire Mike Vrabel. He's the more experienced version of Antonio Pierce, pretty much.
So if it worked out that way, and it worked out for the Chargers, Harbaugh, Reed, Peyton, and Vrabel, that's got to be the best 4 coaching by far. Like, I can't think of another division that has that kind of firepower.
Yeah. If you're Vrabel, though,
Do you want to go there?
yeah, I don't know. The relationship with Tom Brady, the money, the history, like that's all very appealing. You live in Vegas, you don't have to pay state taxes. But I don't know. I happen to think the Raiders are kind of far away from like really being a contender, but he's had worse rosters in Tennessee.
Yeah. And Mariota, was he available?
He is
Head back to the
available.
Raiders. Remember when we used to fear Mariota running against the Chargers? Like that was a thing.
Yeah. He could bring him back. I don't know. If you're to me, like I think objectively the Chargers with Justin Herbert, new training facility, California, all that, and the Commanders to me are the top jobs. It sounds like the Commanders are going all offense, so we'll see what happens there.
Yeah, that makes sense. As they should. They're picking a quarterback, so
yeah. All right. Definitely encourage anybody on here listening to follow Charlie Sinclair. He is constantly retweeting videos of whoever the Chargers are interested in. So if you're trying to find some content about people talking about the Chargers, Charlie does a great job of reposting that. And so appreciate him in here tonight. We got Alex Insdorf in the chat as well. Appreciate Alex. Is going to be doing a special edition of Bold Breakdowns tomorrow with a special guest. So definitely stay tuned for that one. Appreciate him in here tonight. And hope that interview went well today, Alex.
Yeah, I'm going to enjoy your interview with Bo Melton.
Hey, Bo Melton's little brother could be a future Charger.
That's true. That's true. And I drafted him in our mock draft. I'm never wrong, just early.
Yes. Shout out Bo Melton. How crazy are the Packers, man? Anyways, Tyler, any final thoughts before we head out?
That's it, man. I'm just excited for more news and more things to drop, and just keep that patience up. It's the 11th today, and we got a week and a half ish left to really get past that division round. So hang in there, take it easy. Don't go left and right and go all over the place for different rumors and things. Just wait and see what happens. It's going to be a good candidate for sure.
Yeah, this is a fun time. This is supposed to be a fun time talking about coaching candidates, GM candidates. I've certainly had fun researching them. So hopefully you guys are having a good time as well. Just a scheduling update for you guys. We are not going to be doing Saturday or Sunday shows during the off season. We will be live here on our channel on Tuesdays and Thursdays, and you can catch us on the Chargers channel on Wednesdays as always. So we'll be doing shows Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday throughout the rest of the offseason. Tyler and I have been creating plans and everything like that, watching tape of prospects, obviously the coaching search. So we're really excited about this offseason. Obviously, the regular season did not go as planned. So the offseason is going to be a ton of fun to discuss. 5th overall pick, new coach, new GM, a lot of exciting things. Hopefully you stick around for the duration of the offseason. All right, we appreciate you guys for tuning in. That's going to do it for us. We'll see you next week. As always, Bolt up.